If you've ever seen the image of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, flaming, pierced, encircled with thorns, you've likely felt something. A pull. A warmth. A mystery. But behind this powerful symbol lies a story, a centuries-old journey of divine love, hidden wounds, and heaven's quiet invitation to humanity. This is the history of the Sacred Heart of Jesus devotion. And today, we begin in the silence of Scripture, where the first beat of this divine heart was heard not by the world, but by one beloved disciple. The first glimpse of the Sacred Heart is found not in visions or cathedrals, but in a quiet moment of love. In John 13 verse 23, we read of the disciple, whom Jesus loved, reclining against Jesus at the Last Supper. That disciple was St. John. The same John who, moments later, would hear the heartbeat of the Messiah. Later, in John 19 verse 34, we witness the most sacred unveiling. One of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once blood and water came out. In that moment, the heart of Jesus, literally and spiritually, was opened to the world. The early Church Fathers believed this was no accident. They saw in this event the birth of the sacramental life of the Church, with blood representing the Eucharist, and water representing baptism. But they also saw something more tender. A heart so full of love, it had to break open for the world to see. Among all the apostles, St. John is the one most closely associated with the Sacred Heart. He was the only apostle present at the cross. He was the one who leaned closest to Christ's chest. And he was known as the Apostle of Love, his gospel and letters filled with the language of divine affection. But curiously, John never described the experience of resting on Christ's heart. Why? According to a later vision received by Saint Gertrude the Great, John explained, "My mission was to write of the eternal Word, but the blissful pulsations of the Sacred Heart were reserved for latter times, when the world, grown cold, would need the warmth of such mysteries." It was as if heaven itself had decided. This truth is too beautiful for now. It must wait until hearts are ready. Though Scripture laid the foundation, the devotion took shape slowly, like embers waiting to be fanned into flame. In the centuries that followed, the heart of Jesus began to stir the imaginations and prayers of saints and mystics. The early Church did not yet speak of a Sacred Heart, as we know it, but the concept was alive. St. Augustine wrote of the love that poured forth from Christ's side as the beginning of the Church. St. John Chrysostom preached that we were born from the heart of Christ. Still, something more intimate was coming. It would begin not in Rome, but in the silence of medieval monasteries. In the 12th century, a Cistercian monk named Saint Bernard of Clairvaux began writing in poetic, mystical terms about the wounds of Jesus. In a powerful work known as Vitus Mystica, he wrote, "They pierced not only his hands, but the very recesses of his most sacred heart. Already wounded by love, now pierced by rage." For Bernard, the heart of Christ was not just a source of divine love. It was also a heart that suffered, wounded by his enemies, and wounded, perhaps more deeply, by the indifference of those he loved. This dual image, a heart burning with love and broken by rejection, became central to future devotions. A century later, in the same Cistercian tradition, the devotion to the Sacred Heart would grow warmer, more personal. Saint Gertrude the Great, a nun gifted with mystical visions, had an extraordinary experience. On the feast of Saint John the Evangelist, she was allowed to rest her head near Jesus' chest. During prayer, she heard the heartbeat of Christ, not metaphorically, but in a vivid, spiritual encounter. Overwhelmed, she asked why John had never spoken of this divine heartbeat. And so came the reply from John himself. The language of the Sacred Heart was not yet for that age. But it is for yours, and for those to come. Gertrude would go on to write prayers, hymns, and reflections that centered on the living, beating heart of Jesus. One of her most moving prayers reads, O Sacred Heart of Jesus! Enkindle in my heart the fire of that ardent love with which thine own is all inflamed, and grant that my will may be eternally conformed to thine. It was in her writings that the devotion began to feel alive, a living connection between the believer and the heart of God. Though these revelations remain mostly within monastic circles, devotion to the Sacred Heart was slowly catching flame. By the 14th and 15th centuries, private prayers and meditations on the heart of Christ were becoming common in certain communities. Artists began to depict Christ with his heart visible, a symbol of divine vulnerability. But still, there was no feast day, no formal devotion approved by Rome, no widespread movement. Heaven, it seemed, was waiting for the right time, and the right soul. That soul would be born in 1647, in a small French town called Varesvres. Her name was Margaret Mary Alacoque, and she would become the chosen messenger to ignite the fire. For now, the heart of Jesus remained hidden, beating quietly through the centuries, waiting for the world to listen. But soon, Christ would reveal it, not just in scripture or in symbols, but in a vision of flames. In a revelation so powerful, it would change the course of Catholic devotion forever. In Part 1, we trace the devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus from the pages of Scripture, through the writings of early Church Fathers, and into the intimate visions of medieval mystics. But now, we enter the 17th century, a time when Europe was still healing from religious wars, plague, and spiritual dryness. And in the quiet town of Paray-le-Monial, nestled in the French countryside, God chose a humble visitation nun to set the world's heart on fire. Her name was Margaret Mary Alacoque, and through her, heaven would reveal the burning love that had waited centuries to be known. Born in 1647, Margaret Mary was not destined for fame, power, or worldly accomplishment. She was quiet, often sick, and at times misunderstood, even by those closest to her. As a child, she suffered from paralysis for 4 years. During that time, she consecrated herself to the Blessed Virgin Mary, vowing that if healed, she would become a nun. The moment she was miraculously cured, her devotion deepened. Eventually, she entered the Visitation Convent of Paray-le-Monial, founded by Saint Francis de Sales and Saint Jane Frances de Chantal. It was there, in the silence of prayer and hidden service, that the heavens opened. It began in 1673. While in adoration before the Blessed Sacrament, Margaret Mary was suddenly overwhelmed by a presence, a radiant warmth that filled the chapel. Jesus appeared to her. His heart was exposed, blazing like a sun, surrounded by thorns, surmounted by a cross, and pouring forth flames of love. And then he spoke. My divine heart is so passionately in love with humanity that it can no longer contain the flames of its burning charity. It must pour them out. This was no metaphor. Jesus was revealing his physical, beating heart, alive with love, and wounded by rejection. Over the next year, Jesus would appear to her multiple times. Each time, he revealed more of his desire, not only for personal devotion but for a universal feast dedicated to his heart. In one vision, Jesus said, Behold this heart which has so loved men. It has spared nothing, even to the exhaustion and consumption of itself, in order to testify its love. And in return I receive from most nothing but ingratitude. He asked Margaret Mary to spread this devotion in 3 key ways. 1. Honor his Sacred Heart in homes, churches, and personal prayer. 2. Receive Holy Communion on the first Friday of each month. 3. Establish a feast day in honor of the Sacred Heart on the Friday after Corpus Christi. These requests were simple in form, but revolutionary in meaning. But the path of divine mission is rarely smooth. Margaret Mary's revelations were met with skepticism, mockery, and harsh judgment, even from within her own convent. Many believed she was imagining things. Others thought her visions were signs of pride or spiritual delusion. She was humiliated, isolated, and even punished. But through it all, she remained faithful. In one of her letters, she wrote, "Jesus seeks hearts that will receive his love in silence, in sacrifice, and in suffering. And heaven, in its wisdom, sent help." In 1675, a Jesuit priest named Father Claude de la Colombière was assigned to the small town of Paris-le-Monial. He was intelligent, holy, discerning. And when Margaret Mary confided in him, he did not dismiss her. Instead, he prayed, listened, and came to believe that her visions were authentic. He became her spiritual director, her defender, and the first public promoter of the Sacred Heart devotion. With his backing, the devotion began to spread, first among the Jesuits, then throughout France. But it would still take decades, even centuries, before the Church formally embraced it. What made this devotion so powerful? It wasn't just theological, it was personal. The Sacred Heart was not just a symbol. It was Jesus himself, pleading for love in return. He revealed to Margaret Mary the 12 promises for those who honored his heart. "I will give them all the graces necessary in their state of life. I will give peace in their families. I will console them in their troubles. I will be their refuge in life and especially at the hour of death." And many more. Each promise was a thread, meant to bind hearts to his. Margaret Mary died in 1690, largely unknown outside her town. But the devotion she carried began to move. It crossed borders, entered hearts, and ignited a fire that would eventually sweep through the Catholic world. In 1765, the devotion was officially approved for public worship by Pope Clement XIII. And in 1856, Pope Pius IX established the Feast of the Sacred Heart for the Universal Church. What began in silence had now become a solemn celebration of Christ's love across continents. The story of the Sacred Heart did not end with Margaret Mary. It lives on, in prayers whispered before dawn, in homes consecrated to divine love, and in every soul that dares to believe that God's heart still beats for them. But there is more. In Part 1, we uncovered the roots of the Sacred Heart devotion, from Scripture and the early Church to the mystics of the Middle Ages. In Part 2, we followed the life of Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque, her visions of the burning heart of Jesus, and the first flickers of a global movement. But in Part 3, we witness how this devotion, once hidden in monasteries and convent chapels, began to rise into cathedrals, into nations, and into the very heartbeat of the modern Catholic Church. The Sacred Heart devotion spread slowly at first, mostly within France, supported by Jesuits, Visitation nuns, and those touched by the writings of Saint Margaret Mary. But the message of divine love, wounded yet undeterred, resonated across borders. And so, in 1765, Pope Clement XIII approved the devotion for use in certain dioceses. Still, it would take nearly another century before the full Church embraced it. That moment came in 1856, when Pope Pius IX declared, "The Feast of the Sacred Heart shall be observed throughout the entire Latin Church." With that, what began as a private revelation became a public celebration, a powerful feast day on the Friday after Corpus Christi, just as Christ had requested. The 19th and early 20th centuries were times of great turmoil, political upheaval, revolution, world wars. Yet in the chaos, the image of the Sacred Heart became a sign of hope and protection. During the French Revolution, many faithful wore medals of the Sacred Heart under their clothing, believing it was a shield against violence. Later, during World War I, Pope Benedict XV implored Catholics to turn to the Sacred Heart in prayer for peace. And in World War II, underground resistance movements in Catholic countries often rallied around the heart of Jesus as a symbol of light in the darkness. It was no longer just a personal devotion. It had become a banner of resistance, trust, and divine mercy in the face of suffering. In the 20th century, the popes themselves became powerful promoters of the Sacred Heart devotion. In 1928, Pope Pius XI issued an encyclical titled Miserantissimus Redemptor, the Most Merciful Redeemer. He called the devotion the most effective spiritual remedy for the evils afflicting the modern world. Then, in 1956, Pope Pius XII wrote Horridus Aquas, meaning, "You will draw water," a reflection on Isaiah 12 verse 3. In it he described the Sacred Heart as a symbol and a summary of the whole mystery of our redemption. For the Church, this was no longer just a private piety. It was now at the center of Catholic spirituality. As devotion to the Sacred Heart grew, so too did the practice of consecrating families, parishes, and even entire nations to the heart of Jesus. These consecrations were rooted in the 12 promises that Jesus gave to Saint Margaret Mary. Among them, "I will bless the homes where the image of my heart is exposed and honored. I will give them all the graces necessary in their state in life. I will be their refuge in life and especially at the hour of death." In 1899, Pope Leo XIII performed a global consecration to the Sacred Heart. He wrote, "This act will be the great act of my pontificate." And it was. That consecration marked the Sacred Heart as the spiritual compass of the Church in the modern world. In the 20th century, God sent another message of mercy, this time through Saint Faustina Kowalska, a humble Polish nun. Jesus appeared to her in the 1930s, revealing the image of divine mercy. One hand raised in blessing, the other touching his chest, from which flowed 2 rays of light. The red and white rays represent the blood and water, just like in the devotion to the Sacred Heart. In many ways, the Divine Mercy devotion is a spiritual descendant of the Sacred Heart devotion. Both emphasize the wounded love of Christ, the desire to save souls, and the call to trust, pray, and return love for love. The heart of Jesus was speaking again, this time to a wounded, war-torn generation. Today, devotion to the Sacred Heart remains as relevant as ever. Every First Friday, millions still receive Holy Communion in reparation. Families consecrate their homes. And in chapels across the world, the Sacred Heart is still burning quietly on altars, waiting, inviting, loving. In an age of anxiety, distraction, and division, this devotion calls us back to something deeply personal. Not rules, not rituals, but to a heart, alive, wounded, and waiting for you. Jesus showed his heart not to frighten us, but to invite us. To remind us that he sees, he feels, and he burns with love for each of us. His heart aches for those who feel unloved. It weeps for those who've walked away. It rejoices over every soul who dares to say, "Jesus, I trust in you." This is not a devotion trapped in stained glass and old books. It's a lifeline for this generation. For your home, your heart, your healing. So, what is the Sacred Heart of Jesus? It is wounded love still burning. It is divine mercy still flowing. It is the answer to a world that has forgotten how to love. Come to the heart of Jesus. Not because you're perfect, but because he is. And because his heart is already open. Thank you for walking with us through this journey, this living history of the Sacred Heart. If this touched you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who may need this divine message today. Let us know in the comments. What does the Sacred Heart mean to you? Until next time, may your heart beat in rhythm with His.